نزد له فيها حسنا إن الله غفور شكور أم يقولون افترى على الله كذبا فإن يشأ الله يختم على قلبك ويمحو الله الباطل ويحق الحق بكلماته إنه عليم بذات الصدور وهو الذي يقبل التوبة عن عباده ويعفو عن السيئات ويعلم ما تفعلون ويستجيب الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات ويزيدهم من فضله والكافرون لهم عذاب شديد ولو بسط الله الرزق لعباده لبغوا في الأرض ولكن ينزل بقدر ما يشاء إنه بعباده خبير بصير وهو الذي ينزل الغيث من بعد ما قنطوا وينشر رحمته وهو الولي الحميد ومن آياته خلق السماوات والأرض وما بث فيهما من دابة وهو على جمعهم إذا يشاء قدير وما أصابكم من مصيبة فبما كسبت أيديكم ويعفو عن كثير وما أنتم بمعجزين في الأرض وما لكم من دون الله من ولي ولا نصير ومن آياته الجوار في البحر كالأعلام إن يشأ يسكن الريح فيظللن رواكد على ظهره إن في ذلك لآيات لكل صبار شكور أو يوبقهن بما كسبوا ويعفو عن كثير ويعلم الذين يجادلون في آياتنا ما لهم من محيص فما أوتيتم من شيء فمتاع الحياة الدنيا وما عند الله خير وأبقى للذين آمنوا وعلى ربهم يتوكلون والذين يجتنبون كبائر الإثم والفواحش وإذا ما غضبوا هم يغفرون والذين استجابوا لربهم وأقاموا الصلاة وأمرهم شورى بينهم ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين إذا أصابهم البغي هم ينتصرون وجزاء سيئة سيئة مثلها فمن عفا وأصلح فأجره على الله إنه لا يحب الظالمين ولمن انتصر بعد ظلمه فأولئك ما عليهم من سبيل إنما السبيل على الذين يظلمون الناس الناس ويبغون في الأرض بغير الحق أولئك لهم عذاب أليم ولمن صبر وغفر إن ذلك لمن عزم الأمور ومن يضلل الله فما له من ولي من بعده وترى الظالمين لما رأوا العذاب يقولون هل إلى مرد من سبيل وتراهم يعرضون عليها خاشعين من
conditions. They generally will be known as neurodivergent or neurominorities or neuro whatever. But I'm going to use for today's session the term neurodivergent. So there's neurotypical, there's neurodivergent, put them together, you get neurodiversity. So the diversity of all different ways of thinking, you know, across that spectrum of human people.
That's really interesting. And I think that sometimes we don't even understand, you know, where we're sitting at when it comes to these things. And you mentioned work. Now, work is very much most of the time seen as someone who is competent, who has to be fast moving, maybe even in certain areas of life, that when people talk about business and entrepreneurs. But I know for a fact that, you know, each person with this kind of neurodiversity attached to them, to themselves, has a specific sort of talent and skill that they can actually work towards if they were understood. But a lot of the times they don't even understand themselves. So how can an individual, you know, understand themselves beforehand? Because not everybody, you know, is obvious to some sort of diagnosis or symptoms. Sometimes, you know, the spectrums are quite huge. So where do we even start with something like this?
A lot of the adults, specifically the ones that are undiagnosed, generally would go through the education system, knowing that they have certain challenges that may not be relatable amongst the general sort of, I don't know, the student, graduate, postgraduate population, whatever it is, or whatever training or, you know, process they go through before they go into the workplace, whatever that experience may be pre-work. And usually it is perhaps more supportive, whether it's the familial setting, whether it's the training or educational setting, whatever that setting or that environment may be, it provides that some sort of scaffolding for them. So they may have some strategies, they may have some support systems in place. It's only when, I think, predominantly when they go into the workplace and they are expected to be competent and they're expected to deliver, and not some of that support is potentially taken away. So it's when they go into a different environment and they realize that, okay, I'm not doing anything differently. So suddenly, why is there a significant challenge here for me to do the same thing that my colleague or my peer is doing, but perhaps doing it differently and able to sort of, get the deliverables out in the way that is expected. So what is going on here? And they then come into this internal conflict where they know that they are absolutely competent in the sense that they have the ability, they have the skills, they have the knowledge. However, what is missing? What is going on? Usually in those situations when they have been put into a different environment, it's the environment that may be presenting barriers or challenges for the individual. I'm not saying in all cases, but in majority of the cases, those barriers will be presented externally that might be inhibiting that individual to be able to utilize their skills in the best way possible. And those barriers could be systemic. So by that, I mean, there are certain policies, there are certain processes, there are procedures, protocols that are to follow that are very, very standardized. And they're generally designed for a neurotypical audience or neurotypical population. Now, when you think about it, someone that is going to process information differently. So we're all going to be exposed to the same stimuli. We're all going to be exposed to the same environment, the same sort of information that's coming in. But the way that we process it in our own minds, in our own brains, is going to be very much individual. generally amongst the human population would do that. For someone that is neurodivergent, that difference is significant. And so they are going to process and interpret that information very, very differently. They're going to reason with it very, very differently. And so therefore, the way that they are going to manage that information and, behave and react to it accordingly, it is going to be, down to how they process that information. And so when processes, external processes are put in place, policies are there, they can be quite inhibiting because it's preventing you from doing things in the way that is more conducive to the way that you do it best, because you're trying to fit in, with the way that, it's expected to be done, expected norm, so to speak. And it goes against their natural instinct. And so they struggle. They cannot use that, unique ability, that talent that they have, the potential that they have. They're not able to obviously use that because the environment is not allowing them to do that. And it's then when they notice those differences, rather than internalizing it and blaming themselves, it's probably worth just seeing what is going on in the environment. What is it that I don't have here that I had maybe in another environment and I didn't have the same challenges?
That is really, again, very interesting, extremely interesting. And I have so many questions from what you just said, but we are coming up to our first break, which is so, so quick, and I cannot believe it. But just for food for thought, when we come back, I want to discuss as to what is available out there to help people with these kind of sort of neurodiversity symptoms or types in which they are labeled or, identify as, because as you're saying, environment, but at the same time, are there regulations, are there policies, are there even employments to actually help assist this? But anyway, we are going on to a break, which is so quick, and I can't wait to come back. I hope all of you that are watching, please do stay tuned, as we have got just the of this, conversation, and we are definitely going to go into it a lot more deeper. Stay with us, don't go away. We have so much more to discuss, and I look forward to seeing you after break.
Sainsbury's? Oh, he made her money.
Hey Sainsbury's, explain it, will you?
Well, the same effort we put into our baking
goes into matching prices.
Remarkable, we've actually come in under budget.
Get it now?
Already got it.
Sainsbury's, good food for all of us.
Our generation's risk of illnesses, like measles and whooping cough, is rising. If we're not vaccinated, we're not protected. And could get seriously ill, risking lifelong disabilities. Are your child's vaccines up to date?
I'm in. Now, you ready for a good day?
He was a scientific hypothesis. She was a clinical study. And the future breakthrough that could cure her is closer than ever. With our research, we can keep saving lives like hers. Donate now to turn science fiction into reality.
Sainsbury's? Oh, he made her money.
Hey Sainsbury's, explain it, will you?
Well, the same effort we put into our baking
goes into matching prices.
Remarkable, we've actually come in under budget.
Get it now?
Already got it.
Sainsbury's, good food for all of us.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Wellbeing Show here on British Muslim TV. I'm Fahima Mohammed, your host, with the wonderful, lovely Uzma Waseem talking to us about embracing neurodiversities in the Muslim community. We've started off talking about it being in employment and in work, and how a lot of us, might identify and have, these labels that we will call ourselves, and at the same time, it does really affect in the way in which we do perform. Not to say it's something that it cannot be done, but it's obviously an awareness. It's something that we have to discuss, whether it's with ourselves and our families, our employers, even in our sort of friendship groups, or in the colleagues, or whatever it may be, because again, it affects our communication. It affects the way in which sometimes we actually sit and have some sort of comfortableness with people, from very simple things to a certain extent, or even our competency levels. And it can take away even a lot of the confidence, because we think that we're not operating like everyone else, when actually every one of us has a set skill and a talent. We just need to discover it. And within this neurodiversity labeling, we can also discover amazing skills, talents, and certain things that needs to be different to accommodate that. Now, do you think, Uzma, that companies, policies are even aware of the regulations out there, that actually they might question you to say, do you tick that box? Do you have a disability? But do they actually accommodate for it? Do they actually give you that same kind of, because we don't know with the actual application process, right? And the recruitment process, is everybody seen to be given that opportunity in the same way? What's your thoughts on that?
So that's literally the day-to-day work that I do. And while I would like to say that in a utopian world, yes, absolutely, there are organizations out there on an even keel, that where they are very much, and the term that we use is neuro-inclusive. So they're very inclusive of individuals that do identify as neurodivergent. And while there are a lot of organizations that are becoming used to understand or have greater awareness of neurodiversity and the different, obviously, categories of individuals that might fit into that broader term, so the different populations, neurotypical, neurodivergent, whatever your neurotype may be, there's a lot of effort. They've got massive recruitment drives that are actually currently taking place and have been for the last several years, where they want to bring on board neurodivergent talent, because they absolutely have key talents that are missing in the workplace. And bringing in that neurodivergent talent is going to fill in those skills gaps. So no doubt we'll be talking about some of those strengths. However, where I find that there is a significant gap is once they have those people through the door, they're onboarded, they're recruited, they've transitioned into the workplace. There seems to be a lack, or there seems to be, significant limitations in the way that, neurodiversity management takes place. It is not sustainable. So what happens is there's a massive recruitment drive. They're looking for specific skills that, are very much prevalent amongst the neurodivergent population. And once they're in the workplace, they hit those challenges. So while they are embracing neurodiversity and being, very proactive in ensuring that there's a diverse representation within their workforce, there seems to be very little work being done, or not knowing how to do, in actually making them feel included. And that is only going to be done by, having certain accommodations in place, having certain systems in place, having certain policies readdressed and reviews to see, are they actually inclusive of various neurodiversities? When individuals
What do you mean by that? Sorry, Uzma, to interrupt you. I just wanted to find out what you mean by that, by feeling included. Is that because the environment is not consistent, or is it because, there's certain stigmas, or are they left out? Can you give me some case studies or examples of what you mean by that, so we can have a real insight? Because I think people who are watching, they might even, raise these kind of issues and maybe bring it up to their employment, workspace or whatever it is, because sometimes it's also because they just do not know. So we need someone like yourself who's working in it to maybe give us some sort of tips and ideas. So give me some ideas as to what you're talking about the inconsistency, the kind of limitedness once you're in, and there's obviously issues when it's happening.
Great question. And those examples that you presented, I would say all of that plus more. So it is very, very subjective. It's very contextual, depending on the organization. So one of the things that anybody that may suspect or even have a neurodivergent identity, is to understand that there is no legal requirement for you to have a diagnosis, for you to actually present evidence to say that, look, hey, I am X, Y, and Z. I am autistic. I have ADHD. I am dyslexic. There is no legal requirement to have a confirmed diagnosis before you will be considered for any kind of adjustment, whether you want to call it a support, fulfilling your needs, whatever it is. Adjustment seems to be the accepted term. If you do suspect or you have a diagnosis, then absolutely, I would sound it out with a trusted colleague or a trusted member of the senior leadership team. If you don't really feel comfortable making a full disclosure at whatever point in time, then it's definitely worth having a conversation with occupational health, or at least, if not your own immediately line manager. I know that there can be certain, challenges there for whatever reason. You may even have a very trusted relationship with your director, line manager, but any trusted person within the senior leadership team could potentially be an ally for you. And just sounding out, having a confidential conversation, the challenges that you are facing. So rather than disclosing a certain condition, you could absolutely just take it down to the level of, okay, so these are the challenges that I am having, and see where that conversation goes. And it's always worth identifying, this is what I'm seeing, or this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm doing, this is how I interpret the situation, and this is the impact it is having on me and my work, whatever that impact may be. When you break it down like that, it's a good conversation starter, and just see where that conversation goes. If you want to actually explore whether you have a neurodiversity, the occupational health is potentially going to be your first point of call, because they themselves, under a legal requirement, will have facilities or opportunities for you to have some level of internal assessment, if not external, just to screen to see, whether it is something that is worth pursuing or whether there's something else that is going on. If it gets to the point where you have screened positively for possible neurodivergency, then you can absolutely, you are within your rights to request a referral. The organisation doesn't have to honour that, but it is in their best interest, and it's something that is always worth having a conversation. So I think that's probably the best advice I can give at this point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's such a useful advice as well, because again, a lot of people, even if they feel uncomfortable in their environment, especially at work, they don't know how to have those kind of conversations where they feel that if anything, it's going to probably make it worse for themselves, or they feel that it's going to be causing some uncomfortable kind of like dialogue, because again, like you said, they may not want to reveal completely what they are, or, like you said, there's no legal requirement, or if they want to, like you said, to go to the occupational health to have some sort of like internal or external assessment or screening, which will only help with the adjustments that is needed in the workforce. Now, I'd like to bring it to out of the work for now. If there's anything else, we can come back to that if it comes to mind. But, there is a lot of stigma in the Muslim community. We do see that, and I like to call things out without actually sugarcoating it, because it is what it is. And I've had these kind of conversations before with parents that have children with ADHD, for example, or any kind of like, neurodiversity, or any sort of like, even disability, for examples, whether it's seen or not seen. And going into sort of, forget workspaces now, but whether it's the normal schools are fine, but what about the actual mosques and centers and madrasas? I find that everyone is treated the exact same, and to an extent that's great, but we need to understand that there are different needs in children, and when they are being taught from such a young age, where a lot of these things are not able to even be diagnosed nor noticeable. And for example, when we are, there's a horrible habit of, expecting all the children to conform and behave and perform in the same way, especially when they are reciting and trying to memorize, for example, certain, scriptures of the Holy Quran and things like that, and the comparison at a young age. And a lot of people can actually be put off. And I know personal friends, because they've had such bad experiences, would not even take their own kids. And it's such a shame, because I think that, learning our faith is so important, but I don't think that we have the actual diverse sort of education within these kind of settings. And it's not as before, where you just have to memorize in parrot form and expect all the children to sit there and just learn and do certain things. There's so much more that needs to be taken into consideration, whether it's in the Arabic schools or whether it's in the mosques. Now, what would be your advice to that? Because I would like to hear, someone as professional as yourself, that we can actually help our communities and our children to love the learning, especially when it comes to our faith, but also have the adult education and awareness to provide even this kind of support that is required. We might go a bit over that we need to, because we're coming up to a break in a couple of minutes, but I'd like you to start it off and then we can continue in a while. So what would be your first kind of insight on what's happening in our Muslim communities when it comes to this?
This has got to be my biggest bugbear when it comes to neurodiversity, being a Muslim myself, and being a minority or a minoritized individual within, the British culture. And what I see is two different things going on. So not only is there potential for us to look within the community and see what's happening there, where do we need to develop that awareness and understanding so that we are better able to engage and support with, the whole community, rather than just selecting the majority, which is the neurotypical majority within our Muslim community. How can we support those that perhaps need, a different way of engaging and being able to fulfill their Islamic obligations and be able to practice in a way that is going to be conducive to their internal needs? The other bugbear that I have as a result of that is we have multiple minoritized identities. It's layer upon layer upon layer from an ethnic racial perspective. Me being female, being a certain age, being neurodivergent myself, and knowing that as Muslims and potentially, being of different race or ethnicity, but just being Muslim alone, going out externally from our community, we should know where the stigmas are and how that stigma can have an impact on an individual.
I don't want to take up, this time now where I have to cut you onto the break. We are going to come back and I want you to continue with this because it's really important. But we have to go into our second break so quickly. Please come back with me as we continue this conversation.
Sainsbury's. Oh, he made her money.
Hey Sainsbury's, explain it, will you?
Well, the same effort we put into our baking
goes into matching prices.
Remarkable. We've actually come in under budget.
Get it now?
Already got it.
Sainsbury's. Good food for all of us.
Our generation's risk of illnesses, like measles and whooping cough, is rising. If we're not vaccinated, we're not protected, and could get seriously ill, risking lifelong disabilities. Are your child's vaccines up to date?
I'm in. Now, you ready for a good day?
He was a scientific hypothesis. She was a clinical study. And the future breakthrough that could cure her is closer than ever. With our research, we can keep saving lives like hers. Donate now to turn science fiction into reality.
Sainsbury's. Oh, he made her money.
Hey Sainsbury's, explain it, will you?
Well, the same effort we put into our baking
goes into matching prices.
Remarkable. We've actually come in under budget.
Get it now?
Already got it.
Sainsbury's. Good food for all of us.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Wellbeing Show here on British Muslim TV. I am so excited with my guest tonight. I honestly can listen to her for ages. I can't even stop talking to her in the break. And I really don't want to miss out on any more of the conversation by me taking it up. So I want to come back to you, Uzma, straight away and ask you, because we were talking about it before the break, with regards to the issues of, the neurodivergent community in the Muslim community and the kind of issues that we can create awareness so that we can actually help our community to actually make it better for us, whether it's in our learning of our own faith, as well as just in community in general, because we do not want to speak about this, or if we do, we feel that we are ostracized, which we already anyway, for being a minority group, for having so many different things that we are up against, and then this is on top of that. So it's understandable to an extent, but it doesn't help us grow and learn. And I think the more we can't have conversations about this and the more we have information about this, we can actually better society that we're living in. So please continue from when we left off before the break.
Yeah, I think it was just trying to explain the two prongs of the situation, the way that I see it. So, if I saw the, not the end result, but I'm seeing the impact of what's happening when individuals are not fully embraced or understood. I won't say accepted, because yes, we are all accepted to a certain extent, but if the differences are not fully embraced and understood and supported within their own community, they are going to have very little hope when it comes to working outside of that community, because we are very much in a multicultural society here in England, here in the UK, Great Britain, yes, we are going to have multiple levels of identities. In most cases, they are going to be minoritized. So we are used to handling stigma. We are used to facing stigma. When that stigma happens within your own community, you become very much at a loss. You are so desperate to try and assimilate and be accepted, you're going to find that. You try and find that elsewhere. Or if you feel that, there are certain things where you are not accepted, you're going to internalize those sentiments, and you're going to try, you're going to start thinking, okay, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I am broken, and maybe there's something that I need to do differently. Maybe I am the one that, isn't supposed to fit in here. So what is it that I need to do to try and fit in? They are going to mask, they are going to try and disclose whatever it is that they feel is a difference, because they might be embarrassed about it. They may be, don't understand it enough themselves, because they've not had the support and the awareness and the openness to be able to discuss it and explore it. So I think there's two things that the community, has a responsibility for. It's having greater awareness, understanding, and supporting individuals as children growing up into active community-based adults, and then being able to empower them so that they're able to carry themselves and do what is needed when they go out into the wider community.
So when we have neurodivergent individuals, especially in the Muslim community, can you describe and explain what are the strengths and challenges in practicing our faith?
So there's a lot of overlapping symptomology when it comes to neurodevelopmental conditions. I'm not going to turn around and say autistic, individuals will be like this, ADHD individuals will be like this, someone that is no. Underlying, it is all about how information is being processed and interpreted. And generally speaking, if we were to look at, very, very quickly, some of those overarching challenges and strengths, if I was to focus on the challenges first, a lot of these will be executive function challenges. So when we're talking about executive function, we're talking about time management, organizational skills, working memory, multitasking, trying to task switch, do lots of things at the same time, trying to process lots of things in your, instant working memory, across different streams of information. And then there's also things that could affect our processing speed as a result. So some might do things a lot quicker, some might do things a lot slower. But when it comes to actually coming out with the outcome, their outcome could be far more superior than somebody that may not be neurodivergent, for instance, because of the unique strengths that they have. So those are just some of the challenges. What is also very prevalent and very common across the different neurodevelopmental conditions is sensory sensitivities. These could be hypersensitivities, these could be hyposensitivities. So, you know, a reduced sensitivity to certain external stimuli. So this could be noise, this could be light, this could be, you know, touch. So wearing certain fabrics, being in large crowds, for instance. And there could be, because of these hyposensitivities, not being able to even acknowledge certain information or stimuli in the environment. So they're missing a lot of cues, or they're misinterpreting certain cues. And so that can affect social engagement, social communication, for instance. So, for instance, if we are talking about someone that, you know, has social anxiety as a result of whatever these difficulties may be, and that social anxiety could stem from a plethora of different things, one of which could be noise sensitivity. They may struggle to practice and fulfill Islamic obligations in congregation, for instance. Even when it comes to learning, they may not feel comfortable working or, you know, studying or learning within a large group environment. And it's not because they don't, you know, they have an aversion to learning Islam or learning the Quran. It could be just an aversion to the actual environment, the social anxiety. It's too far overwhelming for them. Same goes to, you know, adults attending the mosque, for instance, being in congregation prayer. How can we, you know, still include them, but perhaps manage some of those sensory sensitivities of having sensory friendly, you know, communal places for prayer, for congregation, for whatever that may be.
Sorry, Uzma, what would that look like? It's great to say that, but, you know, some people have absolutely no clue what would be a sensory kind of space for someone who might find it more comfortable. And even if they walk in, would it be obvious, or would it be something that is not that, you know, sort of like obvious? How would you sort of describe a space like that?
If I was to look at it from, I mean, just, you know, for the sake of time, look at it from an educational perspective, not that this is possible in a lot of places, but, you know, you can absolutely do this, you know, just using your creativity. So I was in Marrakesh over the summer, and I went to Ben Yusuf Madrasa, and they don't have one open space or two open spaces where boys and girls, male, female, are separated. But the space that is, you know, for a group is a huge hall or a huge space. They had smaller classrooms across different floors, and these were smaller rooms, open, very limited in what was in that room. So there wasn't a lot of overstimulation with having lots of different things in there, you know, lots of books or whatever. It was a very simple, basic room, very modest rooms. And I would only imagine perhaps one teacher accommodating a class of maybe 4 or 5 students.
Right.
That is perfect. You know, for some individuals, they get that level of social engagement and learning off peers, but then they also aren't going to be overwhelmed with the, you know, having lots of voices being spoken, lots of recitations. You can imagine the distraction that could be for someone that perhaps has ADHD when they're trying to hyper-focus on their own work. You can imagine what that might look like when you have large group settings for someone that may be autistic and is going to, you know, feel that social anxiety being in a large group of, you know, 30, 40, 50 or so students. It's bad enough when they have to do that during the day in a classroom environment and all that masking, come home in the evening, and now they have to do it at a madrasa.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
What can you do, you know?
No, that really does give some food for thought, because I think a lot of students, especially learning from a young age, especially when it comes to our faith, they might actually, or even their parents might think that, you know, at the end of the day, just like you would in normal education, that they're not good enough, or they're comparing, or the fact that they don't want to learn, and sometimes it can be seen upon as being mischievous. But I think it's a different conversation today where, it will take us out of that sort of, normality of judgment, and hopefully, looking back with a little bit more sort of like awareness that, we need to sort of focus somewhere different and analyze differently. And I think that's what's really important. Neurodivergent individuals can also be linked to, or neurodivergence, shall I say, can be linked to mental health. Mental health issues, could you describe some of the things that it can be linked to, and what can be done there, especially when it comes again to practicing our faith?
Yeah, so the link generally is that unless you have a co-occurring condition, for instance, so bipolar disorder, generally there's a high prevalence rate of the individuals that have ADHD may also have bipolar disorder, or they may be misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder because some of the symptoms may obviously present themselves as being almost identical. When it comes to mental well-being and mental health, generally speaking, undiagnosed or untreated or unsupported, more importantly, neurodevelopmental conditions will lead to a series of various different mental health conditions. It could have an adverse impact. So at the lower end of the spectrum, it could be just general anxiety. Social anxiety, for instance, on a day-to-day basis. You come home, you do decompress, you're ready to go for the next day. And then on the polar end of the spectrum, that could be severe anxiety, depression, etc. Untreated, unsupported ADHD, for example, has a higher risk of schizophrenia in later life. So that's just another reason for why it is so important that we as Muslims show greater compassion, even if there is nothing physically that we can do to alter an environment for certain individuals. At least show some compassion and understanding, and allow that individual to feel accepted for their differences.
To sort of even practicing, say, Salah, for example, if you mentioned before OCD, so the continuation of, even I've heard people say that they constantly think that they've forgotten or the numbers that they've read, and they continue in their prayer. So when do they take that serious? Because again, there's a different spectrum of OCD. We all say, oh yeah, we're a bit OCD because we're constantly doing certain things. What would be your sort of advice on that?
And I think that's generally, OCD could be an isolated condition within its own right. Mostly the link that happens with neurodivergent individuals, and I'm not saying this is the only link, but in most cases, many cases, the conditions like OCD manifest because of the pressure to conform.
We're going to come back. We'll come back to that, Uzma. I have just run over time where I have a break coming up. We're going to come back to that question and we're going to answer it after the break. See you.
Sainsbury's. Oh, we made our money.
Hey Sainsbury's, explain it, will you?
Well, the same effort we put into our baking
goes into matching prices.
Remarkable. We've actually come in under budget.
Get it now?
Already got it.
Sainsbury's. Good food for all of us.
Our generation's risk of illnesses, like measles and whooping cough, is rising. If we're not vaccinated, we're not protected, and could get seriously ill, risking lifelong disabilities. Are your child's vaccines up to date?
I'm in. Now, you ready for a good day?
He was a scientific hypothesis. She was a clinical study. And the future breakthrough that could cure her is closer than ever. With our research, we can keep saving lives like hers. Donate now to turn science fiction into reality.
Sainsbury's. Oh, we made our money.
Hey Sainsbury's, explain it, will you?
Well, the same effort we put into our baking
goes into matching prices.
Remarkable. We've actually come in under budget.
Get it now?
Already got it.
Sainsbury's. Good food for all of us.
Salam and welcome back to the Wellbeing Show for the last part of this episode. And it's actually quite sad because there's so much more to discuss, but we are going to go straight into it again as we have Uzma sharing so many important insights. Again, I've asked you a question just before the break with regards to OCD and people praying and finding it difficult. I mean, obviously there's different spectrums. A lot of us might just say it very openly. And I think that sometimes when we talk about mental health, we need to be careful because there are some serious cases where, you know, even for something like OCD, you know, you can wash your hands to the point where you're actually, you know, damaging your skin. So it is something serious. We shouldn't be just saying things like that. And at the same time, we need to obviously take heed. There's a difference between habit. There's a difference between actually having an actual kind of, you know, sort of, you know, spectrum that you want to call yourself in as neurodivergent. And there's also, you know, these assessments that you can really sort of understand yourself better. But some of it's thoughts, some of it's actually the fact that you are who you are. And again, like I mentioned, the habits. So what would you advise someone who is, you know, having a bit of symptoms of OCD and they constantly praying and they do feel that, you know, it's something that holds them back? Because I hear that quite often, and it is whether it's just, you know, some sort of like relapse on thought, or is it really something that they do need to take further?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very weighted question. It warrants a lot of exploration, that just how somebody could perhaps, you know, better support themselves or take that, you know, first leap of faith and action in terms of, okay, so how can I make this less strenuous on me? How can I make this less of an issue or a problem for me where it's having such an adverse impact? Not being from a clinical, you know, background myself, I'm not going to be in a position to be able to, you know, answer that in the best way possible. However, there are so many different support groups out there that you can, you know, potentially tap into, and it's finding one that works best for you. So I'm not suggesting that you absolutely have to go out and get some therapy, but it's actually, you know, trying to find some resources that can support you and being open to the fact that, you know, okay, so I have, you know, OCD potentially, or I have OCD tendencies, but not, you know, hitting the clinical threshold. At the end of the day, whatever it is, does it really matter? It is having an adverse impact. How do I deal with that, those tendencies? How do I manage it so that it's having a healthier impact on me? Sometimes OCD can be quite a good thing. For instance, you know, helping with hyperfocus, with learning, especially when it comes to learning chronic verses, and ensuring that you're doing that with such accuracy, for instance. It could, you know, come across as perfectionism. However, when it comes to it having adverse clinical implications on an individual, then I absolutely, you know, would advise finding the best suited, you know, appropriately trained practitioner to see what possible routes there are for treatment. I couldn't say anything more than that other than signpost and do referrals.
No, I know I do tend to have these loaded questions again, because I know I just love this topic and I'm so passionate, and to have someone new on board, you know, you just want to, like, you know, basically suck whatever is in your mind. I just wanted to have it all. But at the same time, I think the other thing I would suggest for everyday people, if they do find that, you know, there's something that they're worried about or it's just a mishap, you know, there's counters. So when you're praying, you know, have a counter so you can actually keep track. And that's a good way of actually understanding that, you know what, this is actually a reassurance. And if it's something that is still not controllable, then you can take it to the next level. So if you're looking at it from your own perspective, you know, there are certain, you know, things that you could do just to make sure that, you know, time yourself, you know, counting, whatever it may be. Now, what would be adopting religious practices, you know, that could actually help in order to, for example, give us some sort of like ways in which that could help with, you know, sort of helping with neurodivergent individuals and certain Islamic practices that goes alongside it, which they feel that they can have some control or even help them spiritually? What would be your kind of guidance on that?
I think with the neurodivergency, with certain aspects of neurodivergency, it's about getting answers. At the end of the day, in the way that the information is being presented, you want to make sense of a lot of things, because that's always the challenge from day one, making sense of things in the way that other people see it, but then embracing the fact that you are going to see things differently. So when it comes to practice, don't be afraid to ask questions. And anybody that is being asked a question, please do not make the other person feel condemned for asking questions, because at the end of the day, we are all very, prone to experience, for instance, to a certain level, various extents, to conform to sort of certain ways of doing things, certain ways of learning, conforming to certain rituals, and they can create significant anxiety for neurodivergent Muslims if they don't understand the premise, if they don't understand where it's coming from. And especially for those that are dealing with, various other comorbid, conditions, for instance, it's understanding, are some of these ways of learning, are some of these, rituals, are they man-made that take precedence over religious flexibility? Because Islam can be quite flexible in certain aspects, in the way that we may be able to practice, but not in what is doctrined in terms of knowledge that we need to know. So are some of these rituals in the way that we are expected to practice Islam, are they culture-based? Are they man-made based, to try and streamline and simplify things to the point where they are inadvertently excluding certain neurodivergent individuals? So I've forgotten what the question was now, and that's my ADHD.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's really, really around also, could you maybe advise us to what can we encourage our families and communities support, and also support neurodivergent children in Islamic education, because I think that's a really important one, because we don't have, I feel, the educated staff to even have this kind of awareness, let alone to implement it. So I'm going to home in on this a lot, actually, because I think, our children are our future, and it's not just the academic education in sort of like, the normal academics that we have in the Western society. Our Islamic education is for life, and it doesn't stop. And at the same time, when you're starting very young with a sort of experience that is not, accommodating, it's not there to give you that holistic sort of learning, taking into consideration with neurodiversity, then I think it can be a problem in the future as well for us to actually practice properly and wholly, alongside, knowing what's cultural and what's not. So give us some tips about the encouraging support and community support, as well as the teachers that are actually educating in Islamic studies.
I think it's I'm seeing a lot of it happening already, to be honest with you. And I think that is in itself, unknowingly, actually becoming more neurodivergent friendly. But I know that there's still so much more that we can do. So traditionally, where there has been a very, very strong focus on rituals that can sometimes, overshadow the core principles, of Islam. It's trying to get reattached to the essence of our faith. And not allowing these rituals to overshadow, what that essence of Islam really is. And if we are going to try and enforce certain ways of doing things, there are certain things that just cannot be changed, the way that we pray, with the way that we do our salah, for instance. But it's providing very explicit narrative and explanation, taking the individual and going on that journey with them and saying, okay, I want you to do this position now, and we are going to do this, and we're going to say this. What do we mean by saying this? What is the purpose of this? It's a means to what end, and explaining that, rather than saying, this is how you have to pray, and this is how you're going to do it. This is how we have to pray in congregation, and it's important that you do that on Friday prayers, for instance, and you have to be shoulder to shoulder. That could be quite, quite perturbing for, certain or neurodivergent individuals that are very touch sensitive, for instance. For us, it may just come across as a slight irritation. For someone that is neurodivergent, it could potentially be mentally painful and overwhelming. So I think it's taking the time out, not to rush through getting the rituals, perfected to a certain age or whatever, but also pairing that and having that balance with, explaining what those core principles of Islam are, so that the child is already starting to get that essence of their faith at a young, early age, rather than doing X, Y, and Z.
Absolutely. You've already said what you've said, and actually that is what Islam actually is, the essence of teaching anyway. So what you brought it back, and we're using that as an excuse for neurodiversity, when actually that is the actual Islamic teaching, is to not just be ritual, but to bring the essence. So that alone is Islam in itself. And I wish that, without us even realizing, but if we do it consciously, we can actually help, a group that it is actually a struggle for them a lot of the times. Now we are coming up to the end of the show. I just want to firstly thank you so much, because there's so much insight, and I do want to invite you back again at some point, because I think you've got so much more to say, and we've only just touched the surface. And I think there's so many people that can be valued with this information over here, with your insights. But I do want to give you a minute or so before we end to share any information if you want on yourself, if people want to get hold of you, if you want that, or some final thoughts, please.
I think there's so much more that we can cover. I mean, at the moment, we have been sort of just touching on what neurodiversity is and the fact that it can have an adverse impact if it is not supported. But I, really would want to be able to signpost to resources on how it can be better, supported, what can be done differently to make people feel more inclusive, so that neurodivergent people don't feel ostracized, don't feel that they're being led to judgment, feeling that they cannot engage into certain practices as expected because they may feel judged not doing it in a way that seems less devout, for instance. And while these resources may not be exclusively or specifically for neurodivergent Muslims or a specific culture, for instance, they absolutely can, provide some, help and insights into, okay, so, this is where it starts. So it's just a starting point in how we can now use that to modify, okay, so how does that work in a Muslim community? How does that work in this context? How does that work in this environment? So many neurodiversity advocacy groups out there. You can look at them, you look for them under various neurodivergent or neurodevelopmental conditions. So, for instance, autism, there are, or ADHD, but I would absolutely look specifically for the more holistic neurodiversity advocacy groups.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Uzma. Honestly, it's come to the end of the show. Unfortunately, you've given us more than we can ever ask for, but inshallah we'll have you back again. I do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for your watching. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us tonight. If you've just tuned in, please do subscribe, and inshallah